This is the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria, session number 37.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Hey everyone, it's Matt. Welcome to session 37 of the Behavioral Observations Podcast. I am thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Amanda Kelly. Those of you who have been longtime listeners may recall her first appearance on the show way back in session 4, I think it was. And boy, I think we recorded that like almost 2 years ago. Anyhow, she's back today in session 37 talking about this really cool sustainability initiative that she's been working on in her adopted home state of Hawaii. Some really cool stuff. And it, if you're like me, it really gave me pause to consider my own personal consumption habits and things like that, and made me wonder, gosh, should I be using fewer paper towels or, to-go cups and things along those lines. Personally, I've been kind of recycling before recycling was cool, but there are also areas of reducing, reusing, etc., that I certainly can make improvements in. So this episode was definitely helpful for me to, again, reflect on my own habits and consumption patterns and things along those lines. So I hope you get a lot out of this. And again, I don't want to spoil too much of the story, so I'm going to let Amanda kind of tell you about this cool thing that she's been working on. So we'll get to Amanda's conversation here in just a second. Before we do, though, I do want to let you know that we are sponsored by BrittonBehavioralConsulting.com. That's BRITTON, behavioralconsulting.com. That is the independent fieldwork supervision service by none other than Dr. Lisa Britton. If you're not familiar with her work, you can go back to session 29 of the podcast and check out our kind of in-depth interview when we talk about best practices in supervision. And, Lisa's basically made it her calling these days to provide real high-quality mentoring to BCBA candidates, particularly in a distance context. So if you're in an area where, you're having a hard time finding a supervisor, if you live in an area where there's a low density of behavior analysts, and there's not a lot of opportunity to get supervision, I would head on over to BrittonBehavioralConsulting.com and go to /contact and drop Lisa an email and see if this is a good match for your needs. So again, that's Britton Behavioral Consulting, BRITTON, behavioralconsulting.com. So another thing I wanted to mention real quickly is that I've been getting a lot of very lovely iTunes reviews in, so thank you to all of you who are taking time to head on over to iTunes and leaving a rating and review. I think what I'll do is perhaps at the beginning of another show down the road here, I'll read some more recent reviews. And these go a long way in terms of helping to spread the word of the podcast. So if you really like the show and you get something out of it, go to iTunes and leave a rating and review. I really appreciate it. So I think that's it for housekeeping. So without any further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Amanda Kelly. Dr. Amanda Kelly, welcome back for a second appearance on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Aloha, and thanks for having me back, Matt. I'm happy to be here.
It's a pleasure, certainly. And so, we're going to talk about some cool stuff you've got going on out there in Hawaii with regard to the topic of sustainability. But I figured we'd just kind of start with, it's been, over a year or so, I think, since our first podcast conversation. So why don't you take a minute and update us on what you've been doing and things like that? I've seen you at a bunch of conferences, and I know you've been kind of speaking here and there, and up to all sorts of stuff. So take a couple of minutes and just kind of let us know what you've been up to.
Never a dull moment in the life, I think, of a behavior analyst, just in general. Definitely a lot of growth in Hawaii. Last time we spoke, it was last year, just started our access to autism insurance, and so now we're about a year and a half into that. So we've seen a growth in behavior analysts. We have licensed in the state 191 as of today. I know they're processing another set that went in. So I'm excited to think that we're going to have about 200 licensed behavior analysts before the end of the first cycle, which was a 2-year cycle in our state. We have
And
a need.
how many BCBAs are there in Hawaii, or
So
licensed eligible practitioners, I guess?
So there in Hawaii, we license the behavior analyst level, so the master's or the doctoral level. We do not license the assistant level. So we are counting in that number of 191. They are all licensed behavior analysts at the BCBA or BCBA D level. Now, the numbers on the behavior analyst certification board registry are a little bit lower. So the numbers look like we have about 145 in the state. And I think the reason for that is that we have some people who are moving into Hawaii, and we also have had now the rollout of telehealth.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some people who can get licensed to practice but don't have to reside in the state.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. We have still been working very hard at trying to get the rollout and implementation of these services or an appropriate level of these services in our Department of Education setting. Last year, I had spoken to you about how we had passed the law and upheld the law. We were very excited about the support. Hawaii is the only state, to my knowledge, or at least the first state, to include the Department of Education in the requirement to have licensed behavior analysts conduct like functional behavior assessments, as an example. We haven't seen the adoption of the law, and so we're potentially looking at maybe some litigation on a state level. But in some ways, that's just sort of an inevitable progression at times. I think Hawaii has become very progressive in this area in the last 3 or 4 years, especially. And we're going to see some growing pains with that process. But we've seen a lot of growth since we last spoke.
That's awesome. And what do you think the number is? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and so we can come back to this or answer it. You can answer it some other time. But what do you think what number of behavior analysts would you be comfortable with in Hawaii to kind of address the needs? I know that's like a Pandora's box of depending on what you define as need and so forth. But what level would you feel comfortable at?
Until we're satiated, yeah.
Right.
Well, I hail from Massachusetts, which is a place that has a dense amount of behavior analysts. And yet I will find that there's still a large need for that. And so I don't think our field has yet found a place of saturation in any state that I'm aware of. In Hawaii, it's hard to make that prediction because we're still feeling out what our needs are, who can access service, who's available, what the barriers are. But I would say I would feel like we were in good shape if we had maybe 3,000 behavior analysts. And that's a number I am sort of kind of taking from experience and picking a little bit out of the air. So right now we have, about 200. So we're maybe still a ways to go. And what we've seen now that we have funding sources for behavior analysts in the state, we have a requirement for registered behavior technicians. We're now nearing 600 RBTs in our state in 2 years. So that's also a really large, incredible growth. In Hawaii in general, we have a lack of like neuropsychologists, doctors, psychologists, physicians, speech and language pathologists. So the rate at which we're seeing behavior analysts and RBTs, behavior technicians, grow is just exponential and far exceeds any other profession we're seeing. So while we still need to grow and we have a lot of growth to do, the rate at which, so if we put this on an acceleration chart, we would be excited to see, where we would extend that and look at our aim.
Very cool. Very cool. I will have Rick Cabina on shortly, so maybe we can delve into that a little bit more. So, but is there anything new in the world of social media? And I know that's a topic that's been kind of near and dear to your heart. And I know you the blurred lines paper and the talk that I've seen you give before, has been well received. Any feedback that you're getting from folks or anything like that, or what's been the response to it, and have there been any new or different issues relative to the use of social media that have come up since you've done that work?
Social media is constantly changing every day. I just look at the platform on Facebook and it's now changed where my messages are. And I now have to check off if I've received them. or it tells me that I'm not a very good responder to my followers or fans. And boy, I'm really motivated by that. So you'll see, kind of keep me in check. If you send me a message on Facebook, you will always get a response. Even now, sometimes I have some of the automated responses. I try to be as authentic as possible, but I'm not always available, depending on the time zone we're talking about. With this social media talk, the funniest thing that has happened when I've presented it is the expression on people's faces. The first time I gave the talk was in California for the Cambridge Center in Buellton. And everybody just was staring at me. And I thought, gosh, I've lost my audience, right? And I might have mentioned that to you before. And they were saying, we're so afraid we've made all these mistakes. And we're all thinking we should pull out our phones and delete Facebook. And I'm like, okay, thanks for that feedback. Because when I saw you, Matt, and that was a talk I presented slightly different in New Hampshire, the first thing I said was like, you do not need to delete your social media accounts. So a little bit of antecedent management based off the feedback I received was helpful. Just a funny aside, I personally have the belief that people in California would dance more or be more likely to dance if I asked them to dance. And people in New Hampshire, having come from New England, I might think we're a little bit more reserved or conservative. And interestingly enough, a small switch in my behavior resulted in the attendees in New Hampshire dancing.
Yeah, we were shamed into it, basically.
No way. It was a lot of fun. But in California, people didn't dance. And the difference was, so a little context, it was the Blurred Lines presentation. There was, of course, that song, Blurred Lines. Sure. And I started with the beginning of that. And in California, I said, okay, dance with me. And I just played the music. And Chris Wilhite stood up and danced. And nobody else got up and danced. But boy, did she shake it. And she made me feel comfortable being on stage dancing as well. When I went to New Hampshire, the slight change I made was just present a behavior that's earlier in the behavior chain, right? So I said, do me a favor and stand up. And the entire audience stood up. And then I said, okay, now dance with me. And they were all already standing up. And Matt, you were in the audience. So.
That's right. I'm not a dancer. Let the record show. But I think I tried. I might have done the robot or something, characteristic of my, New England stuffiness, perhaps. But
I would have never said I was a dancer, and you're not unless you dance. And so, what I would say with social media and my connection to that is, keep it fun, keep it about science, but don't lose the access we have to people and the how easy it is to connect with different audiences. And being too stuffy is going to turn off people from our research, which of course needs to be the underpinnings of what we're disseminating.
Got it. All right, cool. Well, thanks for that update. Sounds like you've been up to lots of cool stuff, and it's been fun to kind of hang out with you from time to time at these events and things like that. So, let's turn to our topic for today, and that is that of sustainability and specifically this initiative that you've been about. And rather than me try to fumble through and try to describe it, I'll let you talk about it. So, allow me just to name it, I guess, and that is, or say the name. It's the hashtag No Straw for Me. Is that what it's called? Do I have that right?
You have it correct.
All
and
right.
With my online social media presence, I have found the importance of hashtags, or have come to evolve with my online presence to understand and now realize how hashtags have become important. And in Hawaii, when we were looking to pass insurance reform, we used hashtag Moamara Keiki, had a very successful online campaign. So whenever I'm looking at something online, I'm trying to search and see what's memorable.
So real quick, remind the audience what that phrase means.
What No Straw for Me means?
No. The hashtag you used, because you threw in some Hawaiian there, and I want to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah. Thanks. You know what? We should tell them they have to listen to the first episode if they have. But
well, many listeners will have listened to that already. But just for we're just in case for those who are newer to the show.
Yeah, retention and recollection, no problem. Malama Arkeki means to care for our children. And so when we were looking at expanding autism insurance reform, it made a lot of sense that we were talking about taking care of, our community, our keiki, and keiki means child here in Hawaii.
Got it.
So definitely that goes into knowing your culture. And I think we've talked a lot about that. And I'm sure that'll come up more today. With the No Straw for Me campaign, honestly, it started as a behavior change program for myself. For a couple of months, I was really aware of a lot of the trash that I'm seeing, out in the middle of the street or on the beaches, quite honestly, here in Hawaii. And my first thought when I moved here was, why is everybody leaving their trash behind? Are these, locals who just aren't, aware? Are these visitors who can't find the trash can? Are these custom, norms that are different with different, countries and people traveling? And then it dawned on me with this really horrific, shocking revelation, which was the plastic is arriving here on our shores. So being an island on North Shore of Oahu, we are surrounded by water, and just pounds and pounds and pounds of trash are arriving. Now, I'm lucky that the beach that I live on or nearby is relatively a pretty clean beach. And a lot of that has to do with the reef, the current, and like the wave patterns. And so, I'm going to connect this to a lot of Aubrey Daniels' work. And I loved the podcast you had with Dr. Daniels. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, he was awesome, isn't he?
Yeah, when you asked how do people get into OBM, and his answer was like, don't, like, just do it where you're at. I was like, there's an authentic answer from an expert in our field. So anyhow, I'm going around, I'm thinking about trash, I'm picking up trash, I'm seeing straws, I'm seeing bottle caps, I'm seeing those small little individual like things people use to floss their teeth with, just small things that we use one time. So I started thinking, it's immediate, it's in my environment, I'm contacting it. And if it's arriving here, it means that it was put in the ocean or improperly disposed of, or perhaps in a landfill.
Okay, so let me just clarify this for a second, because when I first started learning about this, my immediate response was like, okay, well, is this a littering problem? And so if I'm understanding you correctly, it's not necessarily a littering problem. It's just stuff kind of coming in from the ocean, and it's not necessarily people just throwing stuff like what was that movie? Was it Anchorman? They had that little scene like from back in the 70s where littering was more common, and they're just throwing stuff in the park and whatnot. That was the image I had. So anyway.
No, it's much more, I think, the accumulation of non-disposable or compostable things that we were using. And that's kind of the revelation I had was first like, okay, here I am picking up trash. Oh my gosh, this trash isn't left behind. Okay, this trash is coming in. Okay, why is this trash coming in, right? Think like a behavior analyst, conduct an assessment. And some of it was just, deep thoughts while taking a 10-minute walk. And what I started thinking about was like, well, when I use a straw or a water bottle, I put in my recycling bin, but in Hawaii, we don't recycle those plastics. They have to go in a shipping container and be shipped to the mainland. So the carbon footprint there. So I started thinking just not using those items, right, will not take up space. And so that's kind of where the thought about straws came from. Quite honestly, I picked a behavior I thought would be really easy to change. I was like, I don't use that many straws, and I'm going to feel like I'm helping, and then I'm going to kind of, just see where it goes.
So straws are just like an example, right? Or an exemplar of one thing to kind of pinpoint.
Yeah, for me,
there's not a straw epidemic in Hawaii.
I wouldn't say it's an epidemic in Hawaii. I would say that we definitely have an issue with single-use items. Straws are in the top 10 marine debris that's out in the ocean. And the statistics are staggering. The average American uses 1.6 straws per day. And you might say, I don't use any. I don't go out ever. But you go and get a small cocktail and they put 2 little stirring straws inside of it. And there's 2 right there. Or you get your morning coffee, or you have a smoothie, or it's summertime, or you're at the airport, or it's to go, or your friend wanted a to go container, or you just sat down at a restaurant, they brought you water with a straw in it. And once I started paying attention to behavior, right, we joke about that, then you see all of this behavior.
They're everywhere.
It's everywhere. And And so for me, it's straws, but for you, it could be plastic bottles. It could be, plastic bags. Hawaii has a plastic bag ban. So it's really a non-issue. Like legislation made it so I don't have to worry about having plastic bags. I have reusable bags. We've adjusted our behavior, but it didn't naturally generalize, right? Or the contingencies haven't yet been in place for that. So I think about plastic water bottles. We don't use them very much in Hawaii either because we're all very hot, constantly, trying to stay hydrated. Water bottles will get your water hot if you're out in the sun. So we use Hydro Flask. So, or something like that. And so decreasing a water bottle or a plastic bag or plastic forks, or I think would be equally as valuable. They just weren't as relevant for my personal change.
Okay. So if I have this correct, you kind of undertook kind of like a personal intervention, right? Almost like a self-management type of program, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So let's walk us through the elements of that. If you're
sure. Yeah. So it started, literally it was like New Year's Eve, and it's so funny and cliche. Cause I traditionally don't have New Year's resolutions, and I can stick to it by making that my resolution. But this year,
that's an easy one to make. I'm in the same boat.
I try to, put things on that to-do list that you're going to check right off. And so nailed it. But this year I was out with, having dinner with a friend, and we were talking about it, a fellow behavior analyst who at the time lived on the North Shore of Oahu. And I was like, here I am. I've been thinking about this for a couple of months, not at the front of my brain. It was sort of in the back, and it wasn't a priority. But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, here I am right now with like a cup that has a lid that I could have a straw in. Like, the opportunities are everywhere. And I said, I wonder if, people in the field want experience. I'm hearing people say, let's do something together outside of what I've already been trained in. And for many, that's intellectual disabilities or autism populations. And there's not a lot of practicum opportunities for, hey, let's all learn how to do ABA and apply it to sustainable change. There are some very important special interest groups, behaviorists for social responsibility, sustainable societies. But I was like, I feel like sometimes I just want to make change occur and like stop talking about it and start doing it.
Sure.
Or start talking about it and then keep talking and start doing. And so I thought, hey, what if I start a group? I wonder if any other behavior analysts would like to practice, like, how does shaping come into play, or how does extinction or response effort, matching law? And then if we really use behavior analytic principles to understand this personal behavior change, what can we learn through that? I didn't have an agenda, and I actually didn't know if anyone would join the group. And so my friend said, I'll join with you, and 2 people make a group. So give it a shot. And at this point, we're close to 300 people in the group.
Nice.
And it's a closed group. I monitor it. I ask questions to see that we're going to keep the focus on what I want to keep it on.
Cool.
There are, but to just mention to you, like when you said it's not like a straw epidemic, or is it, there are so many organizations I found, like when I started doing like kind of now a lit review, you asked like, what are, some next steps with this too? I don't want to just change my behavior. I've identified some barriers. I feel like it's been a pilot study of sorts. One thing that happened was I learned a lot about changing behavior and how hard it is to change your own behavior and what we're asking people to do. And so it was humbling to go through a behavior management, self-management program. At the same time, it was really formative. And there's the like Sea Turtle Conservancy group, and there's Emmy from the Lonely Whale Foundation. And they have a lot of celebrities. And they reached out, which celebrities give you a lot of attention, right? And they reached out to Jack Johnson, who lives on the North Shore of Oahu, a few miles down the road here, and said, hey, does your Kakua Sustainable Foundation want to partner and have a no straw campaign? And they said, we're already working on that. We already have our own version of that. But hey, why don't you talk to this girl, Dr. Kelly over here, Amanda? She's doing something with straws. So thanks to local connections and just talking to people and knowing people, and another behavior analyst who volunteers with that group. So you see, your network is important. I'm going to be having a meeting this week or next week with Emmy from the Lonely Whale Foundation. And they have a lot of the publicity and the money, but they don't have any of the research. And so they want to talk about how to support me in now doing this with restaurant or systems research.
And what is the Lonely Whale Foundation?
I don't know too much about them other than they are an organization, a nonprofit, sustainability interests, and one of their missions is to decrease or eliminate straw usage. And they've been working with restaurants, and so they have, like in Boulder, Colorado, initiatives. Entire cities are going straw free, and it's incredible because a lot of people who are saying like, A, I don't use a lot of straws. Yes, maybe you do, or a lot of us could, and B, somebody might complain that they want a straw. Well, there's a lot of things we know about replacement behaviors and alternatives and incompatibles that we can alter and accommodate and put in. Doesn't have to be elimination, but specifically the elimination of single-use plastic item. And I chose straws, like I was saying to you, because it's such a massive problem. I didn't know where else to start, and so I started really small.
Sounds like a reasonable first step. I'm aware that you did some data collection on your straw usage and things like that. You want to talk about that?
Of course, a behavior analyst has to collect data and display the data and analyze the data. One of the really exciting sort of projects or pieces of this from a practicum standpoint is that, okay, I have data, and I started asking other people, let's collect data. So we were using permanent product data. So you keep the straw if you get an accidental straw, and you stick it in a cup, and you have to walk by it every day. It's a sort of visual reminder, right? It became part of the intervention. At first, I was like, and then you must reuse it 17 times because it's 2017. But plastic straws really they don't stand up, and it gets kind of gross. And so I eliminated that as part of the treatment protocol pretty early on. But with that data, my first week, I accumulated 5 accidental straws, and I was like, I don't want to tell anybody. How about if we start this next week? What if we say this week is baseline? What if I just say it was only 2 drinks, but they put 2 straws in each drink? And I thought, oh my gosh, I had my first aha connection moment to a family member or to a teacher. And I thought, why would someone falsify or lie about data? And it's like, I never would. It would be unethical for me to do so. But those thoughts ran right through my head. I was sort of ashamed because of the public posting aspect of it, which is an effective piece of controlling my behavior. At least it was initially. So I reported it, shame and all, to the group, and nobody made me feel horrible. And I said, here's what I learned. I had 2 accidental watered down at the table straws, and then I had I think, or one of those and 2 cocktails, something like that. It was just 5 straws and 3 drinks. Then the second week, I accumulated like 1, and then 0, 0, 0, 0. And we started looking at the data of, is it number of opportunities? So if I got, 5 out of 6 opportunities, I did really good. I only got a straw that one time. Or is it total number of straws? And so data can be morphed in all sort of different ways. And so one of the things I emphasize through this behavior change program is, don't use indirect measures of behavior if you don't have to, right? I can have a direct measure, number of straws, and I can have it in a permanent product way, and that can be a simple way to collect data. So they don't have to be, you don't have to have a complex data collection system for it to be informative. And most of us know that, or we learn that in our process. But now at this point, what I've done is I've looked at how many straws I've accumulated per month, because it's been so few. I will tell you, I've accumulated 10. I really, really kind of beat myself up when I got to that double digit. But on average, the average United States citizen would have used something like 400 and some odd straws at this point in the year.
I can't wrap my mind around that, but I pretty much drink coffee, water, or beer. So, there's not a lot of straw opportunities I
like that. Straw opportunities. That's awesome. I might use that, but I'll credit you for sure.
Right. Sequoia, personal, what's the
correspondence there? Yes. Yeah. For me, it's always summer outside, essentially. It's Hawaii. So we were in the land of food trucks, disposable, tourist industry. Somebody in my group was like, I'm doing great. And then they went on a vacation and they're like, oh my gosh, I got 15 straws this week. And I'm like, yeah, your numbers now are way off. But the thing in that group is that when you're doing personal self change, it's not about comparing to each other in that group. So nobody made me feel shameful. We don't do that to each other. Something that I find people who are not behavior analysts, or even people who kind of just don't automatically instinctually go to what we know from a behavioral analytics standpoint with these kinds of topics is they'll start going to the gloom and doom, right? Like the world is ending. Turtles have straws stuck up their nose and you did that, Matt. Like you did that. And it's like, well, what do we know about aversive procedures and what do we know about what effectively controls behavior? And I mentioned I was going to bring it back to Aubrey Daniels and, his picnic analysis, which real briefly is if something is positive, immediate, and certain or negative, immediate, and certain, it's more likely going to control your behavior or more likely to have an immediate impact on behavior change than something that is delayed, that is uncertain, that is negative. So telling me that my straw in my smoothie is going to end up in a turtle's nose is negative, it's delayed, and it's uncertain. It's highly unlikely. It's not that I don't care. Like that's really good. I watched that video. I was horrified. I mean, it's definitely seared in my mind. It had, I'm sure, some impact. But what motivates me more is 10 cents off that coffee, or you get a free cookie when you bring in your own container, or the satisfaction I feel, or the social, the way that's maintained socially if it's valued in your culture or in your society.
Yeah, I've always liked that picnic framework, and it's I don't use those acronyms when I'm talking to people to lay people in my everyday life, but I will say something like eating right and exercising has a delayed outcome that may or may not look like I guess that your ideal after doing this, and it's whereas having a piece of cheesecake or having a double espresso or something like that is kind of right there in front of you. So yeah, I've always enjoyed that way of framing things up, and it's simple, and I think when you explain it in the terms like you just did, people kind of get it. So as you're describing that, people in different situations, for example, you live in kind of like vacation land, if you will, where the straw opportunities are higher, and so someone like myself there's not a lot of straws going on on a rainy November day, in New Hampshire, right, when it's 40 degrees out and things like that. So, it might be that someone, in my situation might pick some other target, of a single-use item or something like that, whether it's like cans of seltzer or whatever.
Yeah, it's definitely a behavior change that could be adjusted to whatever you need to change. Honestly, single-use items definitely are very important in eliminating them, not just plastics. I mean, in the talk that I have prepared coming up for the Hawaii Association for Behavior Analysis, I talk about, when we have lots of paper single-use items, that leads to deforestation. It's just, for me, I picked straws and plastic items because they're much more relevant. They're more immediate in my environment. And so think about what's immediate to you. Rainy day in November, you're going to go get a cup of coffee. If it's going to be to go, is it going to have a plastic lid? Is the cup that you use or the cafe that you visit, do they have the paper cups but they're lined with plastic, or is it the ones that say made from plants? And so, not always, I don't want you to feel like you can't go anywhere and you're going to be just like, oh my gosh, I can't make a decision. There's plastic everywhere. But when I'm at a grocery store, I look at the way the foods are packaged, and if I have a choice, I make the choice that doesn't, contain the plastic. Like if I don't know that what I'm using is going to be responsibly disposed of, or even if it is, it's not going to go away forever, then I need to be thinking twice about whether or not I need to use it. And I think that would be the framework I would give other people.
I see. So so I know you're meeting with those folks in the near future, but just from Amanda Kelly's personal situation, where is your straw intervention at right now, and where do you see it going moving forward? I know you mentioned some data just a second ago, so tell us where this is headed.
Sometimes I let the path decide, which is really nice when you're not doing it for a research publication for a university, for example. My journey in sustainable interest started when I was like 4 years old. My parents, got me this little book about how to save the world in the 80s, right? And I would shut the water off when people were brushing their teeth or turn off the lights as they were exiting the room. And I was sort of this, maybe a little bit obnoxious, but they found it endearing at that age, right? And so I was doing lots of those things and continue to have an interest in politics and things like that and what's going on in the world around us. Grew up with my father in the Army, so we were living in different places, and I got exposed to different cultures or settings and geographic regions. And so I think that was kind of something on my mind. I've been an analytical thinker. And then in 2012, I was very fortunate to be invited to be a student member of the ABAI planning group for the Behavior Change of a Sustainable World conference. And it was one of the first conferences that I've attended that was put on with ABAI support, Dr. Bill Heward, Janet Twyman, Dick Malott, Scott Geller, myself, and some other really phenomenal behavior analysts were there. But it was not just put on for behavior analysts. So there were environmentalists in the room, and it was just different disciplines, and we weren't talking to ourselves.
Right.
And it was very eye-opening and encouraging. And I went to this farm, a sustainable farm with like Dick Malott and Janet Twyman, and we were eating cookies that were baked in a solar oven outside, and they had built their whole house out of like beer bottles and mud. And it's like, that's so amazing and super cool. Annie and Jay Warmke, it's the Blue Rock farm, sustainable farm. They're amazing, but that's not for me. And so I'm not going to live my whole life that way, or I haven't yet figured out how to be happy living my life that way, or being capable of putting, all my time into building my house, or having property to do that. But it was inspirational nonetheless. And being immersed and seeing how somebody can do it all the time helps you realize how you can start to do it some of the time. And what I've learned through my process now moving forward since that convention, and still continued conversations with those experts in that area, both within the field of behavior analysis or like Lonnie Thompson, who is an ICE Corps researcher scientist. It's really nice to have those connections. And the mission that came out of that whole convention was, it's not about like, if you tell people it's too late, like it's too late to save the earth, then we're going to allocate our behavior to doing something else because we don't see the potential for the outcome to be, or the incentive to be where we want it to be. And matching law tells us we're going to allocate. So it's more about, this is the way things are. This is what needs to change, or what can change, and what can you do about it? And what kind of improvements can you make? And I personally felt like, how far am I going to go with this straw thing? And then I think about those people in my group, and when we add up the straws we didn't use based off averages, we've saved 65,000 straws this year. I didn't know I had that power. I didn't know we had that power. And of course we do. So as behavior changers, as human beings, as behavior analysts, this can go anywhere, and it should go wherever the need is in your community. So I feel like as behavior analysts, we show people our relevance. We don't tell it to them. And if this is what's going on around you, or if an area of interest to you, start and look local, and while you're thinking global.
So staying with the straw initiative for a second, let's get really granular here. So let's say someone wanted to reduce their, and again, this could be straws, it could be plastic tops, or but anything that they're going to get, let's say in some sort of food service situation that is single use. What are the specific strategies you use to prevent people using putting straws in your stuff and whatnot?
So that's where the hashtag came from, no straw for me. I wanted to have a verbal script or statement that I would say to somebody or get practice saying. So it was no straw for me, or like, hey, I don't need a straw, was essentially what you were communicating. Mm-hmm. And so to remember to say that, I created like small visuals and stickers, and I stuck them on the back of my cell phone and hand them out to my friends. And so, we'd go places or put them on our water containers, and we'd have that visual prompt or reminder, that cue, because it's not yet in our daily repertoire, right? Like grabbing a straw is very habitual. Same thing for restaurant and wait staff. You ask them, I find if you make a joke and you say like, I'm allergic, like, hey, no straws, okay, I'm allergic. And they're used to people saying like, with a side of lemon and an extra drop of this and no ice, and, sure. And you say no straw, and they kind of like look at you twice and they're like, oh, okay. And sometimes they're like, how come? And when I get a how come, I'm like, if I don't need a straw, don't use it. Or like real short, like where you have your we always talk about having our elevator speech. I have to have my answer in 2 seconds because that waitress needs to go see the next table or deliver our order. The sabotage of the environment, the restaurant environment, is the bartenders. And I'm not faulting them, but if they are filling an order and they're not communicating with the customer, somebody else is, they're very likely out of habit just going to go ahead and start throwing straws in drinks or dressing up the drinks or things like that. So some other strategies I had was I stopped ordering cocktails, Matt, when I'd go out. I'm like, why am I ordering cocktails? People just want to put straws in them. I'm going to order beer, or I'm going to get, something else. I found if you visually have a straw, people sometimes are like, oh, you have your own. Like, they're kind of cool with it. Locally, we have very few restaurants. And so if I go to them, they now say to me, oh, hey, no straw for you. And they're like, hey, we moved our straws to the other side of the counter. And sometimes I'm getting restaurants to start to make some change just through our conversations and being a small town.
All right.
Yeah.
So let me ask a pointed question here, because you've lived in New England, of course, and now that you're out there in Hawaii, and I've never been to Hawaii, but from what I understand, people out there are very chill, very laid back, and things like that. People in New England, not so much. So I'm just trying to think about how this would go down in, one of the Boston suburbs or something like that. How do you do this without sounding like a crazy person? Because I could just, I could just see someone go, what? And maybe it's just me because I'm, I don't know. I'm not outgoing terribly in those situations and things like that. So I would probably be, kind of horrified to do it or whatever. But what are some best practices for doing this? And if you could put yourself in the shoes of someone who is not in a culture that is, another thing to add on to the attribute of being laid back, however we want to define that, I'm sure I'm also imagining that there's quite a bit of focus on the environment and preserving it, et cetera, out there, because that is the thing, right? And maybe not so much elsewhere. So, if you can kind of put yourself in a situation where people may be a little bit more kind of weirded out by that sort of thing, and they perhaps are in a culture where it's not terribly attentive to conservation, sustainability, et cetera. What would be some advice that you would give to someone to try to do something like this?
I've definitely thought about those things, and we've encountered that with different personalities in the group as well, which has been really nice to not do this, my own self-management project, by myself. And it is about creating that culture and knowing your culture. So what's relevant? So when I think about New England, yes, people can be maybe more busy and focused on what they're doing instead of having a conversation with you. But I think about, getting ice cream in the summer in New England, right? And you want it in a cup or a cone. Well, if you get it in a cup, you have a spoon, right? So you can make a decision where you say, I'm going to get it in a cone. You can make a decision where you just say, hey, I'm going to get in a cup, and you look and survey the place and say, do you get your own spoons, or do they put them in the cup for you? So a lot of it's taking inventory, right? And making some antecedent or preventative decisions. What I am finding is there are some organizations around the world, and I've seen this through traveling and talking at different places. The fact of the matter is I made it through 7 days in Denver while traveling from Hawaii round trip without one single straw. And that I couldn't believe, because that's a lot of different personalities. And let me tell you, if you're kind of alluding to the fact that people in New England may not be as laid back, I think about people in an airport. They're all kind of stressed out and busy,
Sure.
and hurried situation. So I would say, sometimes what I'll do is I'll do just a blocking, technique, like we know in behavior analysis. So if the straws are right there by the counter and they make your drink and then they go to throw it in, sometimes I'm just casually standing with my hand over the straw container. So they have to ask me to move or whatever, body positioning, natural environmental arrangements. But I think a lot of it's going to be adjustments. I think it's going to be, what we have seen is that there are some establishments who pride themselves and like the recognition they're getting for making some organizational changes. And I see everybody I talk to as an opportunity to engage in conversations about behavior change and behavior analysis. You just have to do that at the level that works with your comfort, your community, knowing the culture, things like that. I don't feel comfortable talking to everybody about this. There are times where I'll just like, oh, like, oh my gosh, everybody has straws. But I went out with a group this weekend for brunch, and it was an ice cream social and milkshakes. And of course, you're going to have straws. So I messaged on a Facebook page like, hey, do you guys happen to have reusable straws? And so it's not a face-to-face conversation, things like that. And they were like, no, but, feel free to bring your own, and great idea. And I did. I brought 10 and actually handed them out to our group, and we were able to do that. But, again, it's that small change. You can say, hey, I want my cup of coffee, no lid. And I'm going to tell you right now, when people go to Dunkin' Donuts, when they go to Dunks in New England, they have already a litany of things they're saying. They don't just get a regular, right? I want an iced blueberry. I want a tall ice. I want a medium iced blueberry coffee with 3 pumps of this, no of this, side of that. I want you to give me some Ben Affleck and lots of sprinkles on my, strawberry donut. And it's like, if you just say no lid, I mean, I'm not sure they're going to bat an eye at you.
That is true. We like our Dunkin' Donuts here. What have you got any negative reactions?
Sometimes I get comments from the peanut gallery, people who are actually with me. They're like, well, what if I wanted a straw? And I'm like, hey, it's personal behavior change program. Get a straw if you want a straw. But now I say, oh, well, hey, I brought an extra one and it's clean, and they're usually just laughing at me or whatever. But I'm not, here I'm still kind of not quite the norm. I'm a little bit of that kooky loveliness, I think. I've been described as childlike, not childish. Yeah, but most of the wait staff, even when I'm talking about airports, other things, people like a little bit of the connection or the conversation. A lot of people do, whatever you're talking about, and just say, hey, how's your day? Or, hey, you know what? You don't have to grab me a straw. I'm actually going to not use one when you see the waitress running back to grab one. Mm-hmm. Just kind of connect to what people have got going on and see that you see them and make a statement. I've had restaurants, I've had airport establishments make systemic changes because of conversations we've had in passing. So I have to say I've had enough of my behavior incentivized that the times where I've gotten kind of a strange look, or they're like, well, whatever. It's not like I put, peanuts in your, pasta. And I'm like, okay, and when somebody does make a mistake, or when somebody brings it over and they're like, oh no, and they're like try to pull the straw out and hide it, I tell them, it's okay. Like I'm trying to be more mindful, and I'm trying to reduce, and eliminate isn't always possible. And so when we think about helping other people with behavior change, I think it's important to think about the value that can occur from reducing a behavior, even if we can't always eliminate a behavior, and kind of knowing that that's still, can be considered achievable, acceptable behavior change.
I see. So if you were to start, let's say, an initiative with a different kind of single-use item or whatever, is there anything that you would do differently in terms of process or procedure?
No, I think the more that you do it, the more of a structure or system you would find. I mean, know what you want to measure. I didn't do that this time. So I didn't know if I wanted to measure percentage of opportunity or total number of straws until I was about 6 weeks in. So I measured both until I was like, well, what I'm trying to do is not pat myself on the back for being like, you got 90 out of 100 opportunities. I'm trying to have, no more than 10 for the rest of this year at least. What I'm going to do with the straws is I'm going to turn them into an art project and hopefully make that a statement about something, because I'm a very visual and I like to draw kind of person. But it's humorous to me that I thought I would have more than 10 straws. So I'm not sure what I'm going to create with such few straws. But if I were going to do it again, or somebody else were going to do something like this, the things that I would say is take inventory. You have assumptions. We all have assumptions about behavior, and we're not always correct about that. So why are we using straws? What is the benefit? Or why are we doing what we're doing? What are some of the barriers or things that can sabotage a behavior change program? Because as we're helping other people change their own behavior, sometimes I go, it's easy to go into a home or into a school and you're like, how come you didn't do that thing we asked? And you don't say it like that, but you're wondering that. And then, just doing this and kind of putting myself in the shoes of the person who's being consulted too. It's like, because behavior change is effortful and not everyone's perfect. And so I would say make sure you have like a relapse plan. It's not like you're going to get back on the bandwagon of sucking things through straws, but whatever you're trying to change, know that there's going to be mistakes, and give yourself like the freedom to mess up a little bit, and then to know how you're going to get back on track. what I've learned from doing the no straw thing is like, now I'm like, well, what else can I do? Right? I'm kind of curious. What has naturally happened is a lot of reduction of single-use plastic in my life. Like I see a lot with like forks and spoons and utensils. It's not a large generalization, right? It's still very similar stimulus class, a straw to a fork, but it's not something I programmed in the way I programmed my straw kind of intervention. And yet I'm not finding a lot of, I'm just more mindful.
I see. I know you've done a lot of literature review on this topic and things like that. Can you talk for a minute about, what are some broader initiatives or examples from the behavior analysis perspective as it relates to sustainability? What would be some of the things that behavior analysts have accomplished, previous to this work?
A lot of work was done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And one of my favorite behavior analysts in this area is Scott Geller, who also, has been featured online. And what he talks a lot about when I hear him talk now is, if you want to get people to save the world, like if you want them to care about saving the world, they have to care about each other and themselves. And so Scott takes a kind of, in some ways, like, yes, a very traditional 1970s, some may say hippy dippy approach to like, let's feel good about this and then we'll want to change. But there's a lot of behavioral credence to that, right? Like, and thinking about how simple things can be and how connected you can get with an audience or somebody in the community who doesn't understand behavior analysis, people start to understand behavior change. And like you said, when you can put it in the context of what they know. So Scott Geller had done things like getting people to wear seatbelts, right? On a small single subject research extension that later led to like legislative change and laws around like people wearing seatbelts. And one of the things he says, if he's in a car with somebody, for example, is, may I care about your safety? May I care about your safety, Matt? And people feel a little bit better. They respond better than like, hey, put your seatbelt on, right? Or that to remove the dinging. It's, may I care about your safety? Can I show you how important you are to me as I lean over and help you buckle your seatbelt, maybe? But other things that, Scott Geller has done.
Hey, guys, don't try that on a date, by the way.
Yeah, please proceed with caution. Don't try any of this at home. Actually, try most of this at home. Change behavior.
I'm talking about the leaning over and putting the... Yeah,
yes. I appreciate that. But, having people reducing litter, right? I think about when I heard Pat Fryman talk about moving ashtrays closer or further away from a doorway. Like, did people smoke closer or further away from the door, but were they more likely to put their cigarette butts there? So it's all this really simple, in some ways, modifications that could literally blow the socks off another profession and be like, how'd you come in here and change this behavior? And be like, well, I've been working on something probably much harder and much more complex for many years, right? Which is, the populations and the work that we've all been kind of trailblazing for the last so many years. I think of Bill Heward. I told you I go around and shut off the sink for my family when they were brushing their teeth. Now when I'm traveling with friends and colleagues and we're at conventions and they're brushing their teeth, I'll turn it off and go, Bill Heward says thank you. Dr. Heward thanks you if you turn off the light as we exit the hotel room. Because he's brought so much of this to the forefront of my attention and discussion that I just credit a lot of the making it real and keeping it real to Dr. Heward. And I would really encourage anyone to check out the special edition in the Behavior Analyst, which was on sustainable behavior change, I believe in 2012, an article by Paul Chance and Dr. Heward, as well as a lot of Scott Geller's work. And Geller's work from 1990 can be pulled up online. And I will tell everybody listening, if you don't already know about ResearchGate, you can go to ResearchGate because the authors are allowed to upload their own articles. So things that typically require a subscription or you have to somehow, financially purchase an article, sometimes you can access that through ResearchGate for free. And that's how I got my hands on some of the more dated or what's not as in the current issues of things that I'm able to find online.
And just for those who are listening, I will have all those linked in the show notes. So if you go to behavioralobservations.com and look up this episode, we'll have that stuff there and you'll be good to go. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, no. I mean, I think that what I was going to say is you might not see anything from the last 5-10 years, or you might see very little. And I think that that's a sign of A, we're not publishing what we're doing, or B, we're not doing what we set out to do when we started doing this decades ago, or we've perhaps gotten distracted and the earth is giving us a wake up call. There's been some pretty phenomenal things happening out there. And again, you don't have to care about the earth to not put a straw in your cup. Maybe you just want the 30 cents off your drink, or you want the free cookie. So it might be a motivator, but it doesn't have to be, you know? So I think that's something to think about, because I know we're often looking at the research and saying, give me the latest and the greatest. And I hope to contribute to that so that we have some updated contributions by behavior analysts.
Are there, do you see on the horizon any kind of low-hanging fruit to go after in terms of another type of sustainability initiative?
Locally, I do. But again, that's being driven by our local needs, and it's the use of styrofoam. And the reason why I say that is because, again, we have food trucks, or you have to-go restaurants, or you have a lot of high tourist industry. Now, like other places who aren't, summertime outside are still going to have a lot of visitors. And any place where you have a lot of visitors and people who aren't there all the time, you have a lot of single-use items, right? For not sustainability, for being like sanitary. Sometimes that's an issue, things like that. That's definitely a barrier sometimes. And cleaning out the straws, right? Like if I can't get it real clean, I don't want to use it again. That's gross. So, I think, what is relevant to you where you're at? Is it something, is it shampoo and conditioner? We all wash our hair, or we all wash our clothes. Is it our bottle of detergent? How many things are you going through? And are they necessary? And if so, how do you mindfully use the items that you need to consume?
Hey, it's Matt here, just by myself. I just want to take a quick break in our conversation to let you know that if you are looking for Type 2 continuing education, you can get that while listening to the podcast. We have selected episodes available for CEs, and so if you want to learn more about how all that works, you can go to behavioralobservations.com/get CEs. And you'll be good to go. So you can get your CEs on the run, which is really cool. So I also want to take a minute to just really thank all of you who have already purchased the CEs from the website. It really makes a difference. It helps fund the podcasting activities here. And again, I just really appreciate it. So again, if you want to learn more, it's behavioralobservations.com/get CEs. Now let's get back to our conversation with Amanda. Hey, I know we are kind of pressed for time a little bit. Do you have a few more minutes for some listener questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. So, and this time you were the one who put out the call for questions. I appreciate you doing that. And so Susie wrote in and said, asked the following question. So she asked a couple of them here. So let's go through them. So number one, how do you manage to organize all your time? Juggling videos and work, and what do you enjoy most and why?
How do I organize my time? I try to have things with flexible deadlines, or things that can be worked on at any time of day. So if I'm, coordinating with you, Matt, we're going to meet at a time that works for both of us. We're going to need to look at time zones. But if I'm, putting together a PowerPoint or working on an article, I can do that at, what is 2 a.m. in Saudi Arabia. I can be working on that here. So having that is really important. I do also think it's really important to have what you're working on overlap as much as possible with the other things you're working on. So I'm doing a talk for the Hawaii Association for Behavior Analysis on sustainable behavior change on the No Straw for Me program, and going further than that. But in St. Louis next month, I'm going to be presenting on how going through a self-management program has made me and humbled me and made me hopefully a more effective or better consultant, and taking that angle of things. So you see there's that overlap, but a slight adjustment for the audiences. And then I think the most important thing for organizing time is to have a network, and to have people who, if I can't do something, I don't say no or add it to my plate. I'll say, a guy who's really good at getting to the bottom of things and can get you having a really engaging discussion that I want to listen to when I'm driving around or sitting in traffic? Matt Sikoria. Matt, you should, let me see if I can get his email for you. So that has been huge. And I have to say, I'm so grateful for the network that Behavior Babe has. At this point, Behavior Babe has been growing on Facebook at about 1,000 followers per month for the last 3 or 4 months. And that is a rate that is new. I'm not sure if it's going to continue. At some point, I think I would imagine we would plateau or saturate. But it means to me that it's meaningful for people, and I really value that. And what I get from it is a lot of engagement and interaction. So the idea is, like you just said, the questions right now, I can just post something on that Facebook page and get access to, even if only, half the people are on there, I get access to 15,000 people almost, and just pick their brains. And man, there's nothing quite like that. So what do I enjoy the most? I enjoy helping. I enjoy helping people. I enjoy making things better than when I got there. And I enjoy figuring out the things that haven't been able to be figured out. It makes for a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of like stress and worry. And I think there are days where I carry, the struggles that we're dealing with on a personal level. I know we all do. And in that way, I would say what helps me get through it is nature. And in Hawaii, we have a lot of that. We have rainbows and turtles and sunshine. But there's also, mountains in Lake Tahoe and skiing and other ways to just kind of get grounded and look at the simplicity in things, because it can feel very overwhelming at times, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, second question here. I'm going to read this exactly as it's written. There's probably some context to this, but here goes. Therapists and parents, do you ever ditch some? How do you know if they are serious and get it? What was the longest you worked with a family?
There are some people who are, the conditions are such that their behavior is going to be changed much more easily than others. And I just mentioned I kind of love that challenge, where for those who it's not as easily achieved. At the same time, we have to allocate our own energy and responses. And so if I feel like there's not buy-in to a treatment program, I'm going to first find out why and figure out what those barriers are, and use my skills as a behavior analyst to see if I can shift and change that situation. I've encountered so many situations that I initially thought were just doomed. I'm like, this is not going to work out. I know, I can already tell. I read the assessment or I conducted, and then I'm wrong. And because of a lot of variables, and I think a lot of it's that interaction and that rapport, I'm very upfront with families when I work with them. Like, I need you to do what you can, but I don't ask them to do more than what I think they can do. And I know that that's a little bit subjective, but needs to be something that we're checking in with our consumers on. Like, is this too much? One of the things I say to families, and I give them a free pass, I say families because I'm doing a lot of work with parents right now, is I say, listen, I don't need you to say yes to me. The only thing I need you to tell me is if you're not going to do something, because then we'll come up with something else. Like, just tell me you're not going to do it. And sometimes they tell me they're going to do it and they don't. And like a week or two later, they're like, okay, I didn't do it because of this barrier. And now can you help me around that? And I'll say, look, no shame in the game, right? We're just going to reflect, revisit, and revise. And so I have not ever had, I don't think that I can recall a family that I've just, kind of said, you're not getting it, I got to ditch you. Sometimes I have been in situations where another person is a better fit for that situation. So I may make a referral to someone either within my own agency or somebody that I have in my network. And that's okay, because I think we all know we're not the consultant for everybody, right? We can't possibly be. The longest I've worked with one family is 10 years. I worked with a client providing in-home ABA services in Massachusetts when he was 9, 10 years old until he was 19 or 20 years old. And I still stay in touch with the family. That was incredible. It's incredible to see where the possibilities are and where the roadblocks are. So when I'm working with 3-year-olds now, 2-year-olds, and I'm like saying like, this is important, and the families are really pushing for the right services at preschool, I say the reason why I'm doing this is because I know what happens if we don't get these services. I know what happens if we do. And I have had a glimpse into, adult services and what they look like in a state like Massachusetts, where there are a lot of supports and there's still a lot to be desired. So I'm in it for the long haul, usually with families that I work with.
So let me ask my own follow-up to that, because I see this sometimes in school settings where a paraprofessional will be assigned to a student, and after a certain length of time, the relationship morphs into something else. Doesn't always happen, but it happens enough where it's, I've recognized it, and it's almost becomes almost like a familial role, and that sometimes is a barrier to effective treatment. So, how did you work for that length of time and be aware of that, assuming that I don't know, I would have to imagine that there's a lot of, we all get attached to the kids we work with, right? And families and things like that. So I think there's a little bit of pull in that direction regardless, right? Because, we don't do this work without, enjoying the individuals we serve. But I have to imagine working with someone for that length of time, breeds a lot of temptation and probably something that's not even you're cognizant of. One is cognizant of. So can you walk us through how that kind of played out over that decade?
Yeah, absolutely. For many families, what we're finding is it depends on how you get involved with them in the first place, right? So for this child, he had opened a school bus door on a highway and caused an accident and received state funding through a grant. But there wasn't a set supervisor, and they didn't have you didn't have to be a BCBA, and there was just different requirements at the time. I started working with him, but his teacher, because I threw an ad or a flyer and I went into the house and I was pursuing my BCABA at the time. So I was like, okay, I guess this is okay. I know what I'm doing. His teacher had offered from the school to provide some oversight. In Massachusetts, this isn't shocking, his teacher was a BCBA, and his teacher had happened to have been my supervisor at a previous agency where we had worked, and so we knew each other, and it worked out okay, regardless of the hodgepodge of how it came together. And what I would say is, after a point, I couldn't maintain the hours I was doing for 10 years. So I was doing my master's and my doctorate throughout. There were plenty of times where I had to say, I have to quit. Okay. I don't have any time. I'm sorry. You guys are awesome, but I can recommend another therapist or what have you. And the family, we would change the intensity of my schedule. Sometimes it would be okay, that's okay. But if you have availability and you can help him learn how to use his new iPod, and you taught him how to shower, all these routines, and now we're struggling with this new thing. Can you help out with some boosters? And so there was times where I was just more of part of on the periphery of his team.
Okay.
My role shifted so much. I didn't stay in the direct support worker role for the 10 years.
Okay, cool. Final question from Susie. Do you ever think, oh, we are so lucky to have insurance policies. Do you ever think of places where ABA is still forbidden and children don't have access to any therapy at all? Can't wait to listen to your podcast and say hi to Matt. Well, hi, Susie, and thanks for providing these questions.
I really appreciate Susie's question, because being a state that's so new into accessing autism insurance, it's very frustrating. We're dealing with, kickbacks of assessments because you didn't cross this T, and now they want to know that generalization goes at the beginning of the report and not the end. And parents are jumping through hoops and people are getting upset, and then it's taking 120 days to credential somebody. So right now I'm in the thick of the drama, and when I hear Susie's question, it really quickly snaps me back to, again, today's problems were yesterday's dreams. We fought really hard for this, and yeah, there are some downsides that come to having your practice regulated, I think, in the way that it is, or sometimes they try to do a little too much through the insurance. But absolutely, we're so lucky. I was sitting doing an observation for a child, or I meet families who are saying to me, they're trying to figure out their schedule for services, but it doesn't even dawn on them that a year ago, when their kid hadn't been diagnosed, there wasn't services, or 2 years ago, there wasn't. So I feel like we need to continue to stay active as behavior analysts. We cannot let insurers tell us how to provide clinically appropriate treatment. We will have to work with them to do it within their ways that make sense, that don't compromise us ethically. But yes, we are lucky to have funding sources, and it's not luck. We're grateful, but it was a lot of hard work, for many, many people. And the behavioral analytic community, no doubt, has been a big part of that. I have just we've just submitted an article for publication. We hope it gets accepted. with several other colleagues on dissemination. And we were talking about UK, the Middle East, Africa, different parts of the United States. And there's a lot of need out there. And it is eye-opening to take a global perspective. Just coming from Massachusetts, where there was such a dense amount of behavior analysts, to Hawaii, I already had, my wake-up call. But it's important to kind of just, as much as you can through the online, world, keep your finger on the pulse of behavior analysis as a larger profession globally. I know in some places, like the BACB is being questioned, in like another country, because it's a United States national accrediting board. And so, how do we navigate around that? And insurance, in Canada, all right, is a different complete system than it is in the United States. So one of the things that was interesting is, as we were working on that article, they had an area, one of the other contributors had written a section on successes, right? Like getting access to insurance. And there was this nice paragraph or two about like, yay, the United States has 46 states. They're nearly there. And I added some more information and context to the barriers. And we ended up moving that section from successes to the barriers or the struggles area once we kind of elaborated. So it can be a double-edged sword, and we're not through the thick of it yet. But I am a believer that it is a benefit to beneficiaries who can receive access to this service, and we need to continue to refine and shape what it looks like and not allow it to shape how we practice.
All right. Very cool. And Susie, thanks again. So before we let you go here, do you have any speaking engagements coming up or anything else that you want to talk about?
I'm glad you asked. I appreciate the opportunity to just share. I'm doing more than I bargained for in the next year. So next month, or in September, I'll be presenting on Stop Sucking and Start Saving the World with Sustainable Behavior Change, the title for the No Straw for Me, in St. Louis in September 21st. I know Dr. Mary Jane Weiss and Tom Zane will also be presenting in St. Louis. I'll be talking about how a self-management behavior change program really helped me become a better behavior analyst, I believe. And then I will be going to the Autism Law Summit, which, if you guys have any interest in learning more about insurance and licensure and things like that, definitely look that up, San Diego for October. But I won't be speaking again until March. And in March, April, and May, it's just too much to keep up with. I feel like I'm going to have to figure out somebody to help me. But I'll be presenting at the Women in Behavior Analysis conference in May, doing a workshop, a half-day workshop on day 3. I will be speaking at another state chapter, but online, so you won't quite catch me there in Mississippi, and on public policy. And then I'm doing a sort of tour. It turned into, like, I tried to say no to these wonderful behavior analysts in Canada, and I said no in 2015 and 2016, and they're like, how about 2017 and 2018? And I realized that they weren't going to stop asking, and I truly don't want people to stop asking. It's far, and the time is tough to coordinate. So I'm going to be speaking in Ontario, doing a full 2 days. We hope to have they hope to have Peter Gearhart with me there as well, and I'm very excited about that. And then the next day, so that's April 18th, 19th, I think. The next day, I'm flying to Kentucky to speak at Kentucky ABA, for 2 days. And Pat Fryman, we hope, will be there as well. So I'm geeking out over my good luck and good fortune there. And then before I come back to Hawaii, I will be doing a pit stop for the Cambridge Center Conference in California. I think that's April 27th. And then I'm going to take, just about a month off before ABBA.
I see.
I'm glad and fortunate that ABBA is in San Diego, that Autism Speaks Law Summit's in San Diego as well. But Ontario, Kentucky, I'm going to be hitting up some of the north and east coast over there.
I see. So, yeah, you got to take that month off so you get your straw usages back down.
We got to keep them low. We got to keep them down. We want to focus on that. Part of why I decided to focus a lot on some of the initiatives I'm doing now is also I needed a mental break, right? It becomes real exhausting when you're combating public policy, licensure, the Department of Education and Department of Health, everybody. And It's interesting because it's nice to be around people going like, oh, straws, like I can get behind that. There's not a whole lot of philosophic views that are some of the same barriers about changing behavior with individuals with, like intellectual disabilities. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
It fills my cup a little bit that I drink from without a straw.
All right. Well, on that pun, we'll leave it there. Amanda, it's always fun chatting with you, and yeah, keep us up to date with what you've got going on.
Thanks so much, Matt. I enjoy everything you're doing with your podcast and what you're contributing to our field. It's a big contribution. So right on.
Thanks. All right. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.